I'm Nicole Bako, an IRA specialist here at Quest Trust Company. Thanks so much for joining us. Today, our special guest is Juan Deshon, another IRA specialist here. And moderating for us today is Evan Reeves, another IRA specialist here. So you're in for a treat. You have 3 IRA specialists with you today. We're so happy that you joined us. Before Juan Deshon goes on, I just have a few slides to share with you about Quest Trust Company and who we are and what we do. All right, let's get this right this time. All right. There we go. All right, top 10 IRA myths busted with Juan Deshon is our topic today. So who is Quest and what do we do? We are the largest IRA custodian in Texas. With 20,000 active investor clients around the country, we are able to serve all 50 states. If you were on the happy hour last night, we actually had somebody from Australia and somebody from Canada. So as long as you are able to do investments in the U.S., you could even be international and still do business with us at Quest. We have $2 billion under assets under administration. And the disclaimer is always, this webinar, just like all of our webinars, is for educational purposes only. We do not give any investment, legal, or tax advice. Please make sure you seek the advice of your attorneys and CPAs before making any major investment decisions. Self-directed IRAs. What is it and why should you have one? So self-directed is really just a marketing term, meaning you are in the driver's seat. You tell us what you want to invest in, and we facilitate the transaction for you. Our clients find their own deals, do their own due diligence, and tell us what they want to invest in, and we help them in that along the way. So there's really no legal distinction between a self-directed IRA or any other IRA on the planet. An IRA is an IRA. So just means you're in the driver's seat there. So some benefits, diversification. So in addition to being able to invest in traditional things like the stock market, mutual funds, here at Quest, we invest in private assets only. So adding diversification, you can invest in things like real estate, promissory notes, and private entities. The tax savings. So in a traditional IRA, you can have tax-deferred savings, paying the taxes at the end, or like in a Roth account, having the potential to have tax-free distributions at retirement. Make sure you contact one of us, an IRA specialist, for more details on those accounts. Social investing, not everybody can get like a typical mortgage. So you might be able to help someone by doing some private money lending and giving someone a mortgage that might not be able to in a typical way. Invest in what you know best. So if you really know a lot about real estate or oil and gas or private lending, this is where you can really come and shine and invest in what you know best. Types of self-directed IRA accounts. Here at Quest, we have 7 accounts broken down into 3 categories: our personal plans, our employer plans, and our specialty plans. I'd love to go into more details with you here, but unfortunately, we don't have time. So please make sure you reach out to us, and we'd love to go over these accounts with you and see how these can work for you and your family members. Investment choices. These are honestly just a few. These are our 3 kind of main categories of things you can invest in, but we honestly have oil and gas, mineral rights, several more things in these 3 categories here. We even have clients who invest in things like racehorses. So really it's invest in what you know. Make sure you reach out to us to see what kind of things might work for you. So those deadlines are coming up for contributions. The rest of the country besides Texas, your contributions are due next month on May 15th. If you live in Texas, June 15th is going to be your deadline to get those 2020 contributions in. So we wanted to make sure and add this slide in to make sure you know how much you can contribute for 2020 and you are able to contribute for 2021 now. So make sure you get in touch with us to get a new account set up if you need one, or make sure you get those contributions in for 2020 and now. All right, so we offer free endless education. So like the weekly webinars that you're attending right now, our YouTube channel is very robust. I know our girls in the marketing department have really been working hard on this. We're actually recording live now, and all of our past webinars are on there under the video section, along with plenty of other videos and resources for you. Our education center on our main website is full of videos and articles as well. We have our virtual networking happy hour, as the slide on the bottom right has, the first and third Wednesday of every month, 6:30 Central Time. A very fun event. Come and have a glass of wine with us and enjoy to see what everybody's doing, what kind of deals they're doing. Everybody gets a little time in the sun, a little bit of time on the microphone there and on camera to share what they're doing. There's always people looking for money, looking to borrow money, looking to lend money, sharing what real estate deals they're doing. Last night, we had our first international visitor, so make sure you come and check out that event as well. And of course, self-directed Saturday, every Saturday at noon Central. We always have a guest speaker there as well. So please make sure you join us for that. Here is our newest big event that we're going to have, our Quest Summer Intensive. So this is going to happen in July. These 3 dates are on a Friday, $25 for tickets. This is really exciting. This is the first summer we're doing this. So we have some really exciting topics coming up, some high-level things. So make sure you go on our website and sign up for this as well. This month, April, we only have a few more days on this one. April is running out before our very eyes. So make sure when you open a new account for April, you put the deal Quest Deal in the coupon section of the fee schedule to have your first asset purchase or transaction fee waived. So then normally that's a $125 fee, and we'll take care of the first one for you when you open a new account in the month of April. So make sure you get in touch with us to get this taken care of for you. All right, so how to get in touch with us. We would love to get in touch with you. So you can use your phone to scan the QR code in the on the left side of the screen. Chat with us. If you ever go to our webpage, a little chat box pops up. Actually, all three of us, Evan, Juan, and myself, are on the chat box throughout the week. These are not robots. It's actually us talking with you. We'd be happy to chat with you. Give us a call, 855-FUN-IRAs. We do make IRAs and financial planning fun for you. Or email us at iraspecialist@questtrust.com. You can email me personally, nicole.baco@questtrust.com. And our moderator, Evan, is putting all this information in the chat box for you. He's going to put Juan and his own email in the chat box for you as well to make sure you can get in touch with us. All right. So now it's time for the man and the topic of the hour, Juan Deshon. All right, Juan, you ready to tell us the 10 big myths about IRAs?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole.
All right.
So thanks everyone for joining. This would be it's actually a pretty fun class to teach because it's actually being able to go over not necessarily the boring basic facts about IRA accounts, but really what everyone's talking about, right? Everyone goes to Google to quickly search and research things about IRA accounts. And there's a lot of information out there that can seem or just hard to read and can be misleading. So what we've done is we've compiled about 10 of the top myths for you guys that we usually see, and I'm going to bust them for you, right? I'm going to share with you, one second here, we're going to share my screen. I'm going to share with you those myths, and I'm going to bust them. I'm going to show you exactly, what's the truth about them, how they actually work. So right now, I'm sharing my screen. Perfect. So again, my name is Juan Deshon. I am one of the IRA specialists here. So my day-to-day job, along with Nicole and Evan, is kind of answer all these questions. And we're kind of the ones that get those, myths, right? We kind of get those questions and people saying, hey, I've heard of this, and that. Is that true? And in a lot of cases, maybe it is, maybe it's not. And so we're just going to jump right into it. But before I do, again, Nicole kind of mentioned it a little bit, but I am not a CPA. I'm not an advisor, or I'm not an attorney either, right? I'm not giving tax, legal, or investment advice. We are just nerds over here that read IRA's publication, and our job is to interpret it as best as possible. I am certified. I have a certified IRA service professional certification. So that's cool. And basically just shows that I do know a lot about these IRA accounts, but that's kind of my niche product. Whenever you're looking as to what you should do for your personal financial goals, that is not, you don't go to Quest. You don't want to ask me those questions. I cannot give you that kind of advice. But my job is to give you all the information possible, the true facts on the IRAs, so you can go ahead and make a best decision for yourself. So let's just get right into this. Again, we're not going to be going over the basics of IRA accounts. This is a good presentation for when you're just getting started. But if you definitely need the basics class to go over IRA accounts in general, definitely watch our 101 class or just give us a call. We'll be happy to kind of answer any questions in a 15-30-minute call. So the biggest, and I think number one myth, is self-directed IRAs are different than regular IRA accounts. And that's not quite true, right? So same, but a little bit different, right? So technically there is no legal distinction between a self-directed, that term self-directed, and an IRA somewhere else. So let me put that in an example for you. Let's say I have an IRA account at Fidelity, and I have an IRA account at Quest. At Quest, I call it my self-directed IRA because I know I can use that for investment types like private entities, like real estate, things of that nature, promissory notes. And I know my Fidelity one, they give me a few options, but everything is kind of in the public traded market. Now, we call it self-directed, and we use it as a marketing term to help you differentiate between the account that helps you deal with the private side and the account that helps you deal with the public side. Fidelity, Charles Schwab, if they wanted to, they could also say that their account is self-directed, and meaning that you can self-direct and choose what stocks you want to purchase, but you're still being limited to all the public side. If you told them I wanted to invest into real estate, they look at you kind of funny. They tell you to distribute the funds, or if they're aware of self-directed IRAs or custodians like us, they'll tell you to move to one of those custodians. So the biggest distinction is it doesn't matter what account you have. An IRA is an IRA. It doesn't matter where you have it. Those rules are never going to change. The pre-tax rules, the tax-deferred treatment, the tax-free treatment, the rules of when you can take the money out without penalty, all that stays the same. What is really changing is going to be where you have it and what investments you can make with that custodian. A lot of our clients actually have funds with Quest and funds with another firm like a Charles Schwab, like a TD Ameritrade, like a Fidelity, where they can constantly move money back and forth as needed so they can diversify their portfolio and have funds in a self-directed IRA, and then we'll call it under a normal IRA account, some in the stock market, some in real estate, right? So again, there is no self-directed option. If you look at our applications, we don't say self-directed Roth IRA. It just says Roth IRA. So really no legal distinction. They go by the same IRS publication on the rules and what you can and cannot do with these accounts. Everything's going to follow the same rules there. So that's really the big one. That's right there. Busted, right? Now the second one, you cannot contribute to both a 401k and an IRA in that same year. And that's not necessarily true. So before I get into this chart and picture you see here, essentially the IRA is a personal plan. Anyone can have one. An IRA is one that you set up for yourself. And then a 401k is a plan that an employer sets up for you where it benefits you and it benefits them. We highly encourage that everyone have a 401k if your employer offers that. It's like we're receiving free money. So we highly suggest that you have a 401k plan, but you can have both. And the reason may be that the 401k plan, you don't necessarily have too much control over it. Now, you may be able to choose what your elected deferrals are going to be and how much out of your paycheck is going to be sent over to the 401k plan. But what that 401k plan is doing, you don't have too much control. An IRA, you can choose to put money in there and you can decide how much. And then you could also choose how it's invested, whether or not it be self-directed or with an account like a Fidelity. You can still choose what you want to do. You can choose a mutual fund, you can choose a CD, whatever you want to do, but you can have a little bit more control in an IRA than you do with 401k just by nature of the plan, right? But you can also contribute to both. I personally am part of the Quest 401k plan, and I'm also part of my own Roth IRA, right? So I can contribute to both, and nothing is going to stop me from doing that. Now, where the confusion lies is on where the benefit comes from. If you are an active participant in a 401k plan and you contribute to something like a traditional IRA, typically a traditional IRA, the benefit and the enticing part of it is it gives you a tax benefit as you put money in. It gives you a tax deduction. As long as you fall basically within this picture right here, what it shows is AGI limits. If you are participating in a 401k plan, you have to be making a modified adjusted gross income within these limits based off of your filing status. If you're single, filing as an individual, and you're making less than $66,000 a year, well, then you qualify to take a full tax deduction on the amount that you contribute to your traditional IRA account. Now, you may say, hey, hold on, I make more than the limit. I make more than $76,000 a year, and I'm part of a 401k at my employer. Does that mean I cannot contribute to an IRA? False. You can contribute, you just cannot take a tax deduction. Now, if you're an individual who's not part of a 401k plan, doesn't have one at all, but has their own IRA plan, these adjusted gross income limits do not apply to you. If you're not sponsored by a 401k plan, you can still take a deduction no matter what you make a year. So when you're someone that's sponsored and looking to a traditional IRA, make sure that you can get that kind of benefit. And if you cannot, it doesn't mean you still cannot contribute to a traditional IRA account, but maybe you want to consider contributing to a Roth IRA account. If you want to look at the differences between traditional IRA and Roth IRA accounts, how to suggest that one-on-one class goes into a little bit more in detail. But the big point I want to point across is contributing to a 401k plan and an IRA in the same year is definitely possible. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Just the benefit of a deduction may vary, right? Based on income, based off if you're participating in the 401k plan or not. So that one there is pretty much busted. But what I want to do also is basically go over the differences of 401k and an IRA. So you can kind of decide whether or not you want to have one over the other or have both at the same time. So let's look over the pros of the 401k plan real quick. The 401k plan has higher contribution limits, right? 401k plans typically allow you to put, depending on your income, a maximum of almost $58,000 a year. You as the employee can defer up to about $19,500, maybe even more if you're over the age of 50. Now, the employer also matches. That's why I highly encourage that you have a 401k plan. The employer can also give you free money based off of what it pays you, right? So that's a huge benefit, right? There's no other IRA account that does that. The employer's giving you free money. Why wouldn't you participate? Eligibility is not based on the income. It's just based off your employment status with the employer. They set the rules. There may be cases that you have to be there for a certain amount of time before you qualify for the 401k. And then you have to stay there for a certain amount of time to be able to reap those benefits and the money they're giving you for free, kind of enticing you to stay there for a longer term. And then again, possible tax deductions on your contributions if you're doing elected deferrals or you are doing Roth contributions. Again, these are things that when you're part of a plan, your HR department will essentially ask you if you want this or that. Now, cons, you're limited over control of the investments, right? Wherever the employer decided to create this 401k, those investments would automatically be invested for you. Typically, nothing too risky, but usually in some mutual funds and growing over time. Another one is you're unable to access it until retirement age or until separation of service. I should have added there. Retirement age is 59 and a half, and separation of service means you're no longer with the company. Once you're no longer with the company, if you've qualified, a certain dollar amount of that would be eligible for you to roll over and take out, either take it out as a personal distribution to yourself, move it to a new 401k plan, move it to an IRA plan, right? So that's really when you get to touch that money. You can't do much with it in the meantime, prior. Now, the IRA gives you a little bit more control of your investments. Again, we call it self-directed because of what you can invest into, but ultimately you are deciding what you want to invest into, right? You're going out there and you're finding those deals. You're going out there and deciding, I want to invest this into this, whether it be stock, whether it be private stock, whether it be stock or be a real estate property, right? You got a little bit more control. And there's not an employer kind of deciding where that account is. You can get possible tax deductions on the contributions, like we mentioned. If you're below a certain income, if you are not sponsored by a 401k plan, you can take deductions. Roth IRAs, so this is only for a Roth IRA, do not have required minimum distributions. That's what RMD stands for. Later on, I kind of touch on what RMDs are, but just keep in mind, Roth IRAs don't have RMDs. Traditional IRAs would. And your ability to withdraw funds without penalties in some circumstances. At the end of my presentation, I do have those circumstances there, but just to kind of tease it a little bit. For example, if you're going to buy a home for your first time, you could take up to a certain dollar amount, $10,000, without penalty from your IRA account, despite your age. And the cons, though, tax deductions are phased out, right, based on AGI, the modified adjusted gross income, if you are sponsored by an employer plan, and the RMD start at age 72. Right, so again, we'll touch on that a little bit, but these are just kind of some pros and cons of the IRA account. Typically, most of my clients will have both of these or used to have a 401k and are now moving to an IRA account. But again, nothing's stopping you from having both. This is just very high level surface, scratching the surface on these 401k and IRA plans. So definitely check out the one-on-one class for more details. Oh, and the last one there, lower contribution limits. Remember I mentioned the 401k, you can always put $58,000 in. An IRA is going to limit you to about $6,000 or $7,000, much, much lower. But basically, that one's busted, right? We can definitely have both plans and contribute to both plans in the same given year. So the other one is going to be, you can have a Roth IRA if you make too much money, right? A lot of people come up to us and tell us, I don't qualify for a Roth IRA. I can't have a Roth IRA because I make too much money. It's a good problem to have. But that's not necessarily true. What they're going based off of is the Roth IRA does have a modified adjusted gross income limit on being able to contribute to the plan. The contribution is putting money from your back pocket into the Roth IRA plan at any point in the year up to a certain limit, right? $6,000 or $7,000 if you're over the age of 50. However, the IRS does say that you cannot do this if you make too much money. For example, we see here, if you're a single individual, then if you make over $140,000, you are not eligible to make that contribution to a Roth IRA. However, so how do I get around it? How can I have a Roth IRA? Am I just never allowed to have one in general? And that's not true, because what happens is there is no income limit to conversions. A conversion is when I move money from a pre-tax account, like a traditional IRA, to a Roth IRA account. As we saw before, the traditional IRA's income limits do not have to deal with contribution eligibility, rather the deduction, right? So anyone making any amount of income can always contribute to those kinds of plans, traditional IRA plans. And if they do, they can then do an immediate conversion of that amount over to the Roth. So in an ideal world, let's say an individual has an IRA account, $0, they just opened it up. They know they make too much money to take the deduction, and frankly, they don't want the deduction. What they want is a Roth IRA, but they know they make too much money to contribute to a Roth IRA as well. So what they can do is they can put that money that they plan to contribute to the Roth into the traditional, because again, they're not limited to doing that. They put their maximum, let's say their maximum was $7,000. And then immediately what they can decide to do is they can convert that $7,000 to a Roth IRA, because there's no income limit for a Roth or for a Roth conversion. Now, by doing so, in an ideal perfect world, theoretically, because this individual did not have a traditional IRA before, and the entire $7,000 that he put into that traditional IRA was after tax money, theoretically, when you make that conversion, it should not be a taxable event, right? And that's what the backdoor Roth IRA essentially is. It's a backdoor method to get a Roth IRA account, to put money into a Roth IRA account. Now, in that ideal scenario, the picture I painted, that individual did not have a traditional IRA anywhere else with any funds. And so 100% of it, once they made that contribution, was after tax money. And that's why the conversion was a tax-free and penalty-free conversion. However, in real world scenarios, that doesn't necessarily always happen. A lot of people have traditional IRA money. So when doing these backdoor Roth conversions, there may be cases where you still get taxed a little bit, right? I would say call us so we can explain that process and the reason why. Definitely also consult CPAs before doing any kind of conversions to make sure that you are not being double taxed. You're not being taxed on the converted amount, or you're being taxed accordingly if you do owe some taxes. So it's a very pro rata type conversation that I think we can talk for about 30 minutes if we wanted to. But in an ideal world, if you had a traditional IRA, just know that you can contribute to the traditional and always do a conversion to a Roth IRA to give you that backdoor Roth IRA. All right. So it doesn't matter what income you make. That one there is now busted. So the myth number 4 is going to be you must wait 5 years to access all of your Roth IRA money. And that's not entirely false. Ultimately, there is a 5-year rule, but I think there's just a miscommunication, or there's not necessarily much information out there to really convey how it works. So we have to discuss what's called Roth IRA distribution ordering rules. Ordering rules are the method in which money from a Roth IRA comes out, right? Think back to accounting class, and you're thinking FIFO, right? First in, first out, right? It's sort of similar. Basically, a Roth IRA, when you make a contribution, that money is always available to you, tax and penalty free. So essentially, if I contribute $6,000 today, 10 years later, that $6,000 I could take out. And the way the IRS sees it is the first amount of money that I distribute from my Roth IRA is going to come from those contributions that I've made. So if I made $6,000 contributions for the next 10 years, ultimately, I'd have $60,000 in the account that I could take out tax and penalty free. That's just what I've been putting in it every single year. The second amount that comes out is, if applicable, is going to be conversions. If you ever did any Roth conversions, that's the next piece to come out. And this is where things get a little bit tricky. Before I get into it, I'm gonna skip to the earnings part. The last one to come out is going to be earnings, right? Anything you've made off of investments, any dividend, interest, whatever it is. So jumping back to the conversions, the reason why it gets a little bit tricky because it kind of has its own clock. Now, if I make a contribution, that's easy, right? Always tax and penalty free. And then I also go ahead and make a conversion. Because it kind of gets stuck in the middle, it adds an extra 5-year clock. And essentially, if I'm an individual that is below the age of 59 and a half, and I want to make a conversion, I cannot touch that converted money until 5 years without penalty. So let me give an example. I think the best way to explain this is an example. If I contribute $5,000, and I also do a conversion of $5,000, and I've also earned $5,000. So my Roth IRA is split into 3 different sections here. I did my conversion today, 2021. What ends up happening is my $5,000 that I contributed, that can come out anytime. The next money that would come out would be the $5,000 from the conversion. Now, if I took out that $5,000 within 5 years, I'd be penalized. I wouldn't be taxed again because I did pay taxes on the converted, but I would be penalized. So I'd have to wait until 2026 until my next $5,000 would be available to me tax and penalty free. And then the last money that's going to come out, the last $5,000 would come out tax and penalty free as long as the account's been open for 5 years. And that's the key distinction. And I'm 59 and a half. It's my first time buying a home, or in the cases of death and disability. So for the most part, we usually see it. You need to qualify to take out money with 59 and a half and having an IRA for 5 years. If you're an individual that is already over the age of 59 and a half, the only qualification that you need to have for all of this money to be tax and penalty free is going to be having had that Roth IRA for a minimum of 5 years. So that's kind of why we say it's always good to start a Roth IRA. The Roth IRA's clock, that 5-year clock, is started from the day you make a contribution. If I make a contribution, if I made a contribution, let's say in 2015, and then I immediately closed it out, that's okay. I still started my clock, and I would have reached my 5 years by now. Because the way it works is, once you make a contribution, it triggers a tax form. And that tax form is sent out to the IRS, and that's the date they have that Roth IRA has been created. And that's what they go off of. But if you don't contribute, there's no tax form. There's nothing for the IRS to go off of. So even simply putting $5, $10, $100 into a Roth IRA starts that 5-year clock of the entire lifespan of the Roth IRA. Even if you closed it out later on down the year and then reopened it again years later, that 5-year clock still started from the first time you made a contribution. So again, just to kind of recap here, you don't have to wait 5 years to access all your Roth IRA money. Your contributions are tax-free and penalty-free at any point in time. Your conversions become penalty-free and tax-free as soon as they've been in the Roth IRA for 5 years. And then your earnings will become tax and penalty-free in the entire account ultimately after the age 59 and a half, contingent you've had it for at least 5 years. Right. And in the cases of first-time home buyers, death and disability, again, the $10,000 you can take out penalty-free from Roth IRA prior to 59 and a half can still come out, right? So you don't have to wait every time 5 years. There's contributions you can take out. And that's why I mentioned you shouldn't be scared to start one. Putting money into a Roth IRA is almost like a glorified savings account. If I put $6,000 in today, I'm not locking it in there forever. I know that I put in $6,000. 10 years down the line, I could take that $6,000 out if for whatever reason I needed it, right? So there's no harm in putting money in a Roth IRA because your contributions are safe, right? So that right there is busted. Now, myth number 5. A lot of times individuals come to us and say, I need an LLC, or do I need an LLC to purchase investments in a self-directed IRA? And I think this comes from a lot of just blogs and such on the web, on the internet. On forums, people like to go through LLCs for investments and for many reasons. And people think that they need an LLC to invest with a self-directed IRA. That's not entirely true. The typical way that we see investments happen, and the reason why IRA custodians even exist, is really because self-directed IRAs, all you need is a custodian. That custodian holds your funds, and that custodian would be responsible in sending money from point A to point B for your investment. And then when it pays out from point B back to point A. I think of it as the IRA as a body, and your custodian, Quest, would be your arms and legs. And you are the brain of the operation. You decide what to do, but we move the money around. So self-directed IRA custodian has a self-directed IRA and sends money directly to the investment. If you throw an LLC in the mix, you're just putting it from IRA custodian, has a self-directed IRA. The IRA custodian helps you move money from the self-directed IRA to the LLC, and then the LLC makes an investment. So it adds that extra layer, right? And people may use it for different reasons, and we'll go over maybe what the reasons may be and why it might be right for you. But you don't need the LLC. A lot of times, most of our clients don't use an LLC, right? So let's look at what might be right for you. So pros of using it through an IRA. One is the custodian reviews the investment contract before anything occurs to make sure it's not prohibited. We will never tell you if the deal is good or bad, but we will tell you, hey, this is not allowed. According to IRA's publication, etc., you cannot do this, right? Typically 4975 is a publication. Tells you exactly what you can and cannot do, but it's our job to really kind of pinpoint and catch those things to make sure you're protected and your IRA doesn't, get distributed to you. The other one is custodian disperses funds for investments and expenses. So again, we're handling the money in the account. We're moving the money from point A to point B as needed, right? You are not necessarily handling it. We're just moving at your discretion, however. We won't move the funds if you don't tell us to. Quest is very, very quick when it comes to this industry, right? 24 to 48 hours is a very quick turnaround to be able to review documents and turn around and also fund investments, especially in this kind of space with real estate. Sometimes you got to be fairly quick. Now, of course, maybe it would be quicker if you had the checkbook control yourself. However, to work through a custodian, this is very, very fast turnaround. I think the fastest in the industry. And then there's entity protection. Your IRA is separate from yourself. If someone were to sue the IRA, they cannot go over after your assets. So you are protected, right? They would have to sue the IRA. Now, some cons is you do pay us fees, right? You pay us for our services. You pay us to keep these lights on, right? You pay us for our services in every single transaction you do, or the more investments you do, the more you're paying. But ultimately, it's usually a minor cost compared to the kind of returns you can make with these self-directed investments. You have paperwork, right? Paperwork, no one likes paperwork. Not even we like paperwork, but it's necessary to make sure the IRA is doing everything correctly. It's being documented, because in cases where maybe you get audited, you're going to want to have that paper trail, right? And then other custodians may take time to process. Again, our turnaround time is fairly quick, 24 to 48 hours. Hiccups may happen. A lot of custodians, they may take 5 business days. They may take a little bit longer. Depends on the investment and the severity and the complexity of the investment, I guess. It may vary. And sometimes that is just not ideal for maybe what you're looking to do. Now, why would you want an LLC? Well, the biggest one I think is there's no middleman, right? In quotations, because the middleman technically is your custodian, right? There's no person you got to pick up the phone to call and say, I want to make this investment. You typically just go through the manager of the LLC, which may be a easier person to get in contact with. Ability to disperse funds quickly, right? Now, this kind of ties into the middleman situation. When you want to invest, you got to call Quest. You got to have us review documents. And we're not just reviewing your documents, we're also reviewing thousands of other clients. So it does take a little bit, maybe 24 hours for us to review the documents. But if you're going through an LLC, the person reviewing the documents is you and probably the manager of the LLC, right? So it's fairly easy. And so they may be able to disperse the funds, maybe quicker than that 24 to 40 hour turnaround that we have. There are no custodial fees or custodial investment paperwork, right? After once you pay the fees to set up this LLC account, really, you're not paying much anymore, right? Maybe you have a bank account and the bank charges you a wire fee. That's pretty much as crazy as it gets. And then the entity protection just like an IRA has it, but it does take your name out of the equation. In an IRA, when you make investments and take title to investments, it does still show your name. It'd be FBO, for the benefit of Joe Smith, whomever it is. In an entity, you can name it whatever you want, and you can hide your name if that's what you're looking for. The cons, you don't have anyone to kind of assist you and look over your shoulder, making sure you're doing things correctly. You can always inquire and ask questions, but with great power comes great responsibility. And you got to make sure that you are familiar with prohibited transaction rules. And you must have a trusted individual. I think this is the biggest con, to be the managing member of the LLC. Now, this is a debated topic, and I'll be happy to discuss it with anyone off the webinar. However, policy is, and also the way publication reads, is that you may not invest into an LLC or a company that you personally, as the account holder, are managing, along with a few other people, individuals who are considered fiduciaries. So you have to go out there and find someone that is not considered a fiduciary in the eyes of the IRS to be that manager of the LLC and be able to manage those funds. Now, sometimes that can be a brother and sister, cousin, best friend, right? But it couldn't be yourself, spouse, kids, or parents. So sometimes that causes an issue, and it causes an issue of who do you have that you can trust to be that person. So that's a big con, I think, and a big hurdle a lot of our clients have to jump over if this is the route that they have to go, or they want to go, I'm saying. But that one's, they're busted, right? You don't need an LLC. You can do the entire investment through a custodian. That's the reason why we're here. We're here to help you and make those investments possible. Myth number 6, you must have the full amount in your IRA to purchase a property. That's not necessarily true, all right? There are different ways to get funds into the account. Now, typically, you need a good chunk of change to buy a property. To buy a $100,000 property, you probably couldn't do it if you only had $6,000. But you don't need the entire purchase price to do it. And there's different ways. So if you're falling short, you can, one, look at making an annual contribution. Right? Again, depending on the type of account, this may be larger in some than others. In typical IRAs, like a traditional or Roth, it's $6,000 to $7,000 a year. Right now, we're in the predicament where we're kind of in between tax years. And so we're still in 2020 while we're in 2021, and you can still contribute for $6,000 for last year and $6,000 for this year. So if you needed 12 grand, you could put that in there, right? Other accounts, like employer plans, they may allow you to put larger contributions in there. As we mentioned, the 401k, for example, $19,500, right? So sometimes an annual contribution is all you really need. One, partner. Now, what I mean by that is you partner with another IRA or another individual. Using your network to leverage them is really ideal in these situations. If you only have 50% of the purchase price, but you know someone else that may have the other 50%, well, then how about you do the deal together? Split profits 50-50. Still buying the entire property cash as to an undivided interest, and you're not necessarily going out to find money. You're just partnering with someone else. One is private money, right? You can actually use private money to loan you or do the IRA money, or instead be a private money lender. And instead of buying the property, loan someone the money so that they can go ahead and buy the property. Right? There's different ways you can invest into real estate with an IRA account. But what I was getting at is a non-recourse loan is probably a very common way to go if you don't necessarily have the full purchase price, but you might have 70%, right? Or 80%, or maybe even 60%. But a non-recourse loan is the only type of loan that an IRA can receive. And the reason why is because it has no recourse to the IRA account holder, to you. So it protects you. There's no credit to go after. Right? There's no credit report that can run an IRA account. Right? The only collateral that the lender is going to have is the property, most likely. Right? So this non-recourse loan is the route to go. However, the requirements are going to be a little different than the loans that you maybe used to receiving. Their interest rates are going to be higher. Their down payment requirements are going to be larger. What they look at is the deal, right, to make sure that they can make some money off of this. So they do have higher requirements because it's a riskier asset for them. There are banks that do these. That's kind of their niche product. Most banks, like the ones you may be familiar with, Chase Bank, Bank of America, they won't loan you. They won't do non-recourse loans. It's not in their interest to do so. They're making enough money with doing regular loans. But other banks like North American Savings Bank, First Western Federal Savings Bank, they may do non-recourse loans. Hard money lenders can do non-recourse loans. Private money lenders can do non-recourse loans. right? So the key thing is that it just has that non-recourse language in the mortgage. And then also there's no recourse to you as the account holder. So it's very risky for the lender, secure for you, but a good route to go if you have most of the purchase price of the property, and something you should definitely look into. Last. Myth number 7, get this one all the time. You can buy a vacation home for yourself in your IRA account. Not exactly, right? So we understand that we have disqualified persons in an IRA account. There's things that you cannot do in an IRA account. So when we look at buying property, you can't buy it off of yourself, but you also can't buy a property in the IRA, because that's where most of your capital is, and then live in the property, right? We all understand that you, yourself, spouse, kids, parents cannot live in that property, cannot be paying rent for that property, cannot use it as a vacation home, right? That property is owned by the IRA account. And again, the IRS, the only way they want you to benefit is by taking a distribution and paying them taxes and then owning the property yourself, right? However, if someone did buy, look at this property right here, gorgeous property, looks like it's somewhere in Hawaii, I don't know, looks beautiful. You may want to live here and retire here one day, but you own it in an IRA. So that's the problem. How do I own that myself? Well, you are allowed to distribute funds out of an IRA account. The same way you do cash, you can take out assets. Right? So again, you can distribute cash the same way you take out assets and vice versa. So what happens is, if I'm an individual who has an IRA account, owns this property, and I'm ready to retire, and that property I would like to live in it, well, then I can just distribute that at face value. Essentially what ends up happening is I have to acquire the value of this property, because the IRS sees it as almost a cash distribution. If that property is worth $100,000, well, then I'd be liable to pay taxes on $100,000, same way I would be if I took out $100,000 cash. Now think about if I own this property in a Roth IRA, where the rule is that my distributions after a certain age, 59 and a half, are completely tax-free. That would apply also not only to cash, but also to assets. So even if I own this in a Roth IRA and it was worth millions of dollars, if I was over the age of 59 and a half, I could take it out completely tax-free. Right? So that's a huge benefit of a Roth IRA account. And I definitely have clients that definitely do this, right? At the moment, they buy these beachfront properties, they buy properties that they really enjoy, they're renting it out, using it as an investment property, they're not using it themselves. And then eventually they believe that they can distribute that asset to themselves and use it as their home, as their vacation home, whatever it may be. And doing it in a Roth is probably more convenient, but doesn't mean you cannot do it in any other IRA account. It just means that you'll pay taxes as if you took out cash. Right, so just think about that. Think about those opportunities. And so this myth right here is sort of half true, right? You can buy a vacation home for yourself. You just can't take advantage of it today, not yet at least. You got to wait until you can distribute those funds. Myth number 8, you can leave the money in your IRA in there forever. And that's not too true. With most accounts, a traditional IRA, for example, a SEP IRA, for example, and a simple IRA are pre-tax accounts. And they have what's called RMDs. So we kind of mentioned that a little bit before, and I think myth 2. And the required minimum distributions are essentially, you reach a certain age, which is now 72, and the IRS says, okay, you are reaching the age of, you may die at any moment. And the IRS says, you owe us money. All the money in that IRA account is pre-tax. So they force you to take a minimum amount every single year based off of your age, and they give you a chart for your life expectancy to find out a minimum number of how much you should be taking out every single year. The reason why they want to force you is because when you take money out, you pay taxes. So they want to get a piece of the pie there, right? What that's called, it's called a uniform lifetime table. That is a table that they actually tell you based on your age what your life expectancy is. And there's a divisor. You take the value of your account, you take the divisor, you divide, and you find out what your minimum is. Right. So, and when you don't take it out, there's a 50% penalty on what you should have taken. Right. So definitely important that you do definitely take out your RMDs. They do force you to do those in these traditional steps and simple and tax deferred plans. And then it continues to to happen even when you pass away and someone inherits your account. They continue to also take those distributions as well, right? The IRS wants you to get paid. Now, the other ones is Roth IRAs, HSAs, and ESAs have no RMDs. These are tax-free accounts. So I kind of mentioned earlier, a Roth IRA account, the kind of deal is you're putting after-tax money in, and as long as you wait to qualify, wait till you're 59 and a half and have had the Roth for 5 years, everything you take out is tax-free. So because that is there, there's no reason for the IRS to limitate you to wait until you're 72 and then force you to take money out, because when you take money out of it, they don't get anything out of that. And then you could also, if someone inherits the account, that's when they are forced to take some money out. But luckily, if it's a Roth, for example, they won't pay taxes on it. But as long as you live, they won't require you to take RMDs, right? So this one, again, kind of yes, no, depends. True, you can leave your money in there forever if it's a Roth IRA, never forced to take money out. You cannot leave the money in there forever if it's a traditional or tax-deferred type of plan, like traditional, SEP, or simple, right? And in cases where you pass away and someone inherits it, there's different rules entirely on what their options would be as well. Give us a call if you want to go over those options or if that's something you're planning. So definitely make sure you plan for that. We get a lot of cases where someone will own a property in an IRA, in a traditional IRA account, and then they owe RMDs, but they don't have cash in the account. They don't have any other accounts also to take the money out from. So they kind of get stuck. And now they have to figure out what they can do. They can either sell, they can either distribute a portion of that asset. That's going to require appraisals every single year. Or they can distribute the entire asset to satisfy the RMD. So don't get yourself in that sticky situation. Make sure you plan accordingly for reaching the age of 72 and having these RMDs. Making sure that you have enough cash in these accounts available would be the simplest route. Myth number 9, your will outlines who will inherit your IRA. And that's not entirely true. You want to make sure you're updating your forms after life-changing events every single time. So if you go through a marriage, update your forms. If you go through a divorce, update your forms. Birth of a child, update your forms. Death of a family member, update your forms, right? Trusts can be named as IRA beneficiaries as well, right? If you'd rather just have the trust being updated every single moment, then just have the IRA's beneficiary be a living trust. Now, to put in perspective how this can get kind of bad is an example. We have had clients before who may have gotten married and then put the spouse, common practice. However, they got a divorce. And the spouse, the husband, never changed who the beneficiary was. But then he got remarried and continued to not change who the beneficiary was. You can kind of see where this is going. Essentially, this spouse passed away. And in his will, it did name his new wife, second wife, as the person who should inherit his things. And the way it works in IRAs is your beneficiary election that you do when you make that account in the form that we have supersedes your will, supersedes probate, right? So they didn't go off of that. They go off of what he put on the beneficiary election form. And what he had was still his first wife. So you can see kind of there's really nothing they can do about that. Now they can kind of combat it, but they would need a very, very strong argument. And for the most part, that beneficiary election form on the application for an IRA will supersede the will. Hopefully, the first spouse was nice enough, but you never know, right? So the point of that is you want to make sure you update your forms after life-changing events to make sure you have the proper people in place. I had someone even earlier today ask me, what happens if I have 2 beneficiaries and both are my children, but one of my children passes away before the other? Does it go to their children? Because I would like it to go to the grandchildren after that. And unfortunately, it does not. It goes to the other primary beneficiary. So if it's currently a 50-50 split and each child has their own families, right? If one of them passes away, that 50% interest of that IRA account just automatically goes to the other child, right? To the second family, I guess. And then the grandchildren of the individual who passed away would unfortunately not have a right to that IRA account. So the solution to that was naming a trust as the beneficiary, a living trust as the beneficiary that would be updated and lay out what would happen in the case of XYZ, right? Always a safe route, or just constantly updating it. And then lastly, myth number 10, before we wrap up here. Myth number 10 is you can only use your IRA money for retirement. That's not the case. There's a lot of exceptions out there on what these IRAs can be used for in certain life events. For example, medical expenses, right? If you have an HSA plan, you can use your HSA plan to take money out completely tax-free to pay for medical expenses. Prescription medicine is one, right? Doctor visits, chiropractic visits, things that are better for your health. They can be paid out of an HSA plan completely tax-free. And the nice thing about an HSA plan is even if I had an expense today and I have an HSA, but maybe I didn't have enough money in the HSA plan, if 10 years down the line, then I can reimburse myself for that past expense. So that's a really cool, neat thing. Definitely watch our HSA class if you're interested and may have an HSA. First time home purchase up to $10,000, right? So if you're in a traditional Roth IRA account, you can take up to $10,000 without penalty. And if it's a Roth, without taxes to go towards closing. Now remember, this is after you've already depleted what you've contributed, maybe even conversions, right? So it's kind of touching into that earnings portion, but you have an exception of up to a certain dollar amount to come out completely tax and penalty free of the Roth IRA to go towards your first homestead. Education. You can use the IRAs to pay for higher education for you, your spouse, or your children, but it must be an accredited institution, undergrad degrees and postgraduate degrees, right? So you can actually use it towards tuition if you have a nest egg in a Roth or a traditional IRA account to pay for those expenses as well. Disability. When you have disability, you can actually take money out prior to reaching the age of 59 and a half. And then the last one is passing the gift of tax-free wealth to your heirs. As we mentioned, a Roth IRA can go on forever. Traditional IRA will have RMDs, but ultimately, if you pass away, someone will inherit it. If you name someone as your inheritor, well, they could take the funds and they could use those for multiple things. In a Roth IRA, if someone inherits a Roth IRA, they can take the money out however they please for over the next 10 years and not have to pay taxes. Even if they inherited $1 million, they could take a lump sum distribution, theoretically, for $1 million in cash and not have to pay a single dime of taxes on that. Or they can spread it out within the next 10 years, but they can use those funds, or they can continue to invest it, even grow it even more for the next 10 years, right? So you can actually use them for whatever it is that you need if you pass on the wealth to your heirs, right? So that one definitely busted. There's more information. There's more things you can do as well. This is just kind of scratching the surface. Definitely exceptions out there. And in disaster situations, there's also exceptions, right? When Harvey hit here in Houston, people were withdrawing funds without penalty out of their IRA accounts to help with expenses because of disaster situations. And the IRS does specify what kind of disasters qualify. So definitely just research, ask CPAs, look at IRS publication. So that one and the last one has been busted, right? So there's a lot of information I went over today, a lot of things that I hope answered and clarified a lot of questions. But of course, there may be more. So get in touch with us. Just chat us on the website. Give us a phone call or email us. Let's schedule a call and discuss these questions that you may have, whether it be an IRA you have with Quest or an IRA you have someone else. Again, as I mentioned with myth number 1, the IRA is the same everywhere else and has the same rules. So don't be afraid to ask us questions. If you have an account with Quest, even more reason to kind of call us and ask questions and use us for the services you are paying for, right? If you're interested in using a self-directed IRA, well, in this month, we have something for you. Nicole mentioned it as well. Right now, if you open an account and you fund it, your first transaction is on us. We want to entice you to make investments. We want to entice you to make money in your IRA accounts and put it to work, right? So what we'll do is typically it costs $125 to buy an investment. We'll just waive the first one for you. No matter if you open 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 accounts, each account can make an investment and that 125 credit will go to your account. So right now is an opportune time to really get active with your IRA and we'll comp your first transaction on Quest. Call us for any details. Email us. We can go over the details of how you can open an account, what account may be best for you based on your situation, maybe clarify any of the topics and myths I went over today. And again, follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram. We're on all these social media platforms. You can rewatch this class on YouTube and Facebook. At any point, you can kind of also see the classes that we've had in the past. So definitely use those resources if you're a client or not a client. Join our happy hour events if you guys are interested in networking. Join our self-directed IRA Saturdays if you're looking for more information. Sometimes we have people like myself who work for Quest and our IRA specialists to give you presentations. And sometimes we also have guest speakers to talk on different topics and different expertise. So feel free to join. We look forward to seeing you in more presentations. And thank you guys for your time.